Well, thanks everyone for joining. We're just going to wait another minute for other attendees to join. For those online waiting, feel free to drop into the chat maybe what you're working on, where you're from, while we wait for a few others to start joining. We should just get started in a few minutes.
And if you want to share a little personal fact, we'd love to hear about something that you've struggled with in terms of supply chains in the last 2 years. Sneak peek, that's going to be coming up in this conversation here. And Jack, I know one thing that really stuck in my mind was that TP shortage back in 2020. Thankfully, a very short one, but definitely left a lot of memories. How about you?
Yeah. I mean, like, I think I kind of remember the good old days where 2-day delivery from Amazon was actually 2-day delivery. And yeah, that is not all too common anymore, but yeah, I'm glad to have the toilet paper back.
And awesome.
All right, yeah.
Looks like someone currently working on a global manufacturing course. Brian, what or anyone else on the list, share your experiences with supply chain shortages, especially any you've experienced at work.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we have a good amount of attendees on the line, so maybe we can go ahead and get started. But yeah, we have people from over 40 different companies registered from a range of industries, high volume consumer electronics to large industrial power electronics. So I think there's a lot of concern and excitement about our topic today. So yeah, just to kick it off. Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining again for our 2022 State of Mass Production webinar. In this session, we'll be covering findings from our research survey, how teams are coping with the current macro environment. And then, of course, we'll be talking about how customers have used the Instrumental platform to navigate these difficult challenges. And towards the end, we'd also love to have some time for Q&A. So feel free to save those questions to the end or drop them into the chat, and we'll try to address all of them at the end of the call. All right, so just to introduce myself, I'm Jack Robbins, a lead product manager here at Instrumental. I have a background in operations research and building software products, and I've been at Instrumental for just about a year now.
Thanks, Jack. My name is Will Greenbaum. I'm the head of solutions here at Instrumental. I've been here just about 3 years, and my background is in mechanical engineering, particularly in product design engineering. And then Instrumental, a little bit of background about us. Instrumental was founded by Apple engineers who led NPI programs at Apple, most famously the first Apple Watch, but a variety of other programs. And they were tired of the brute force approach to a lot of manufacturing. So across the company, we have decades of manufacturing experience, which we put into the world's first manufacturing optimization platform. And we work every day with top brands doing manufacturing around the world. And we wanted to understand a little bit about where they ended up after the challenges of the last 2 years. So today we're going to share some of our learnings from our State of Mass Production survey. So bottom line is, operations professionals are not feeling in control of their processes. There's a variety of factors from low visibility into factories, multiple false starts in China due to lockdowns, and supply chain shortages. So this report here from The Economist shows that the mention of, different report shows that the mention of supply chain in earnings reports by Fortune 500 companies went up over 400% from 2020 to 2021 and has continued to go up into 2022. So this is what board members and leaders of companies in America are talking about right now. Now, what some of the pros are doing to mitigate this is pushing forward with digital transformation technologies, trying to regain oversight into their factories, leverage this new field of digital tools to stand up factories in other countries, and facilitate the adjustment of designs to make the most of components that they are able to source. So we're going to talk a little bit more about each of those themes here, going through some of the data. So we went ahead and talked to those leaders that I was just mentioned to understand their top concerns. And we wanted to know how engineering and operations teams in mass production are coping with supply chain disruptions and the challenges of data collection when they can't visit the factory themselves. So we surveyed over 300 individuals across the industry in verticals such as consumer electronics, industrial electronics, medical devices, automotive, aerospace, and mission critical devices. This is all from 2022, and it's no surprise that the number one concern of manufacturing and engineering leaders in mass production is how to adapt to supply chain disruptions. But it's not the only item on the list. So close behind is concerns about scaling for increased demand and the ability to meet cost reduction goals. So I'd say one common theme I see in all of these is the need for agility. You know, things are changing and you're either trying to ramp up or ramp down or continue holding your throughput across your factory and your production lines. And it's just becoming increasingly difficult without being able to do that and stay agile without being at your factory. Now, Jack, I know you've been talking to a lot of operations leaders lately from our product standpoint. Was any of this research surprising to you?
Yeah, no, some parts of it weren't all too surprising, like the adapting to supply chain disruptions came up, sort of across the board in my research. I always like to ask the question, if you had a magic wand to solve any of your problems, what would you wish for? And almost across the board, people replied asking for chips or other component shortages to not be sort of in shortage anymore. So that wasn't too surprising. What was a little surprising was that scaling for increased demand. Though in many ways the world has been turned upside down over the past few years, so you'd kind of expect demand to fall with it. But with so much stimulus around the world and people's behaviors changing to sort of consume more devices, it actually kind of makes sense that demand a bit has increased across the board. And of course there's other side effects of that, such as inflation, etc. But that was kind of interesting to see here, is that like so much disruption has happened, yet demand is still so strong. But yeah, beyond that, yeah, pretty expected. So we also wanted to see how those concerns that Will was talking about are broken down by different key segments of the market. So consumer electronics brands are noticeably less concerned about supply chain disruptions, although it is sort of in their top three still. In consumer electronics, manufacturers cited that the reduced ability to travel to your factory as the top concern, with supply chain disruptions coming in third, behind the ability to meet cost reduction goals. So consumer brands need their established teams to frequently travel to factories for several reasons. Firstly, they're developing products more frequently. They can't scale local hiring up and down as easily. And travel has historically been the only way to know exactly what's happening on the factory floor, a pattern that's actually starting to change with the digital age. And consumer electronics are also more likely to be using a contract manufacturer, which do tend to have more in-region support. On the other hand, industrial electronics brands have different concerns. They're worried about adapting to supply chain disruptions, scaling for increased customer demand, and the ability to hire in region. Whereas, as we saw in consumer brands, they didn't cite hiring in region as a top three concern. Now, we thought a lot about this, and one reason could be that the industrial electronics brands are often setting up their factories to sustain themselves for longer periods of time. So they need to train a local team to become familiar with these procedures intimately, which is kind of very different from consumer, where travel is prioritized and products are changing far more regularly.
And that's really interesting to see the difference in the different segments of the industry, Jack. I would say overall, there's a lot of external factors, though, and it seems like companies are struggling just to manage them. Did you find anything that leaders were worried about more internally that they can directly control?
Mhm. Yeah, we definitely found a lot of opportunities for just different groups and teams within the same organization to collaborate better. Because of course, not everyone is going to change COVID policies globally. Just things are just outside of our control. So yeah, we wanted to double click on what teams can start doing to mitigate their problems.
Yeah, I'd
Um,
love to hear that.
yeah, one thing that we've heard a lot about when talking to customers is the handoff between NPI and MB teams, often around a new product ramp. So what can these brands do to stay in control? Well, the data didn't tell us exactly, for across the board why MP teams want to be part of the solution in NPI, but it could be a desire to support their NPI counterparts, or maybe it's due to a lack of trust. But regardless, it's worth understanding the cultural differences between these two teams. Everyone's working towards kind of the same goal. Everyone wants to launch on time and on budget, but the day-to-day work between these two teams affects the way they approach problem solving in mass production. So on the NPI side, your groups are motivated by the creative opportunity to build a new product. NPI teams believe experimentation and failures are essential parts of the design and engineering process, and teams regularly sign up for things that they've never done before because they want to do that engaging and rich R&D process. On the other hand, in mass production, consistency and standardization is the best environment for success. Frequent disruptions and changes don't tend to have the best results in mass production. And there's motivation to meet deadlines and yield targets, which tend to be aggressive, especially now. And the MP teams rely on NPI to deliver a mature and MP-ready product that's ready for ramp.
Yeah, wow. Seeing these goals laid out like this, it's little wonder that NPI and MP teams solve problems differently. And I gotta say, I wish someone had showed me this my first day as an engineer, so I could really understand that. It really, in NPI sounds like changing things is, the name of the game. You're changing things all the time, and in mass production, you're looking for consistency. Variation can be the enemy. So
Mhm.
given those conflicts, what did you learn about ways for these teams to work together better?
Mhm. Yeah, we wanted to make sure that we had a good bed of research to fall back on. So we asked this question in the survey. Far and away, the top ask was for NPI teams to identify and fix issues earlier in the process, which wasn't all too surprising. The other two that follow, getting MP teams involved earlier and completing the NPI on schedule, all sort of fit that pattern. But the bottom line here is that the MP teams feel like not enough issues are caught early enough, and they get stuck with them in mass production. So yeah, we did want to take a look directly at some of the data on why NPIs were delayed. And Will, I know that we did a similar survey last year called the State of NPI. Is there anything in that survey that might explain why it's so hard to solve these issues during NPI earlier?
And thanks for teeing me up there, Jack. Yeah, we have some great results from our survey that we did last year. And shocking to maybe no one is at the top of the list also disruption to supply chain. That's made it very difficult for NPI teams to meet their schedules and solve problems before they have to release their products for production.
Mhm. And Will, I know that you had worked at Apple and Tesla before. How did the supply chain issues impact your NPI process?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. It would add a bunch of new designs. So often there might be a part or a vendor that you really want to use and solves everything, and you just aren't able to get those parts. So you have to design for a part or material, and that leads to new issues because the quality is not consistent or it doesn't have the same capabilities. And then what that leads to is having to add more complexity to the design, which then can lead to more issues because you're making changes to things that really don't need to really be there. And the worst was when something worked and then you lost access to a part and you had to go back and redesign something that was already working. And now you're spending all your time as an engineer kind of revalidating something that wasn't even an issue, instead of fixing all those problems that those MP teams really want you to be dealing with now instead of later.
Makes sense.
But it was very real. It happened all the time. One thing that consistently came up, and I'll talk about this a bit more, is access to data. I will say supply chain data always seemed to be something that we never quite could easily get to. And it was a huge challenge to get that traceability and actually do the validation, compare performance across different suppliers and materials. Which really, taking us back to the MP survey here, is a great transition into talking about data access for mass production. So we learned that teams with less access to automated data are less satisfied with their company's overall infrastructure and processes. And as I said, it just makes everything harder when you don't have the data you need to actually, cross a problem off the list, or show that something is validated. So we learned that 2 in 3 engineers are not satisfied with their organization's data collection process, and over 80% of those who are unsatisfied with their data infrastructure rely on manual reports. On the other hand, those who leverage real-time data are significantly more satisfied with their company's infrastructure. So they're just happier by having more access to their data.
Yeah, no, and that kind of makes sense. And we wanted to break down these numbers a little bit more. So here's some more interesting results from that survey. As Will mentioned, satisfaction with data infrastructure increases across the board with more real time and with more breadth of your data. And this kind of makes sense because engineers and operations teams will be more efficient and happier if they can spend time solving interesting problems and making improvements rather than wrangling all this data, cleaning it up in order to just do some basic analysis. So no surprises here. Engineers will be happier with more and stronger data infrastructure. Yeah. But Will, I'd like to understand like how you used to work with data and how maybe you were spending some time wrangling this data in your prior roles.
Yeah, it was a lot of different things, and instead of just relying on my experience, we also asked about this in the survey, and we asked leaders, how many hours per week do you think your engineers were spending on the following activities? And on the next slide here, we have some of that data. When we asked leaders what their engineers were doing, the answer was a lot of things that were not engineering. And so leaders of MP programs must be juggling all these different priorities, really keeping an eye on the most business critical things that their team needs to be doing. But at the end of the day, way at the bottom of that list was making changes on the line. So the result of that is just a huge amount of overhead to keep your manufacturing operations going. And we talked earlier about needing agility to handle and respond to a lot of these disruptions, and having all this overhead, both when it comes to needing to get data from your suppliers, from your factories, being able to project manage ever-changing schedules due to supply chain, putting together reports and presentations for your leadership, and having to cull data manually from lots of different sources. These things make it a lot harder for your team to be agile. And so, we really want to know with these challenges, how are teams navigating this and trying to regain control? Mm-hmm. So Jack, I think you learned a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely did, from research and from the survey. And I have to say, just like the amount of time that engineers and operations teams are spending basically not really doing their job is kind of appalling, especially when these groups are the bottleneck often for these major and important initiatives. So basically what we found in terms of how teams are coping with this is that we know that like a very small portion of the layest iPhones are actually going to be made in India, and parts of the next Pixel phone from Google are going to be done in Vietnam. It's at least based on public reports. And Apple's also producing their iPads in northern Vietnam. Microsoft is shipping Xbox consoles from Ho Chi Minh City. Amazon is making Fire TV devices in India, and several years ago, all these devices were made in China. So we've helped several companies stand up new factories remotely as they transition away from original factory locations. And these same companies are also looking for ways to gain more control via remote oversight and monitoring technology. So companies like Meta, Bose, Honeywell, L3Harris are all using Instrumental to monitor throughput and maintain control through mass production. But companies are also rethinking, as Will mentioned, their design process in order to adjust for potential component shortages and replacements if those supply chains fall short. So we did want to share a little bit about how Instrumental is helping and how engineers are able to take advantage of our technology to solve these problems.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Yeah, we'll tell a few stories here about ways our customers have been using Instrumental to get more agile and adapt to the ever-changing environment, such as moving factories to new countries. We just want to give a little background here on what is Instrumental as a manufacturing optimization platform. At the heart, Instrumental makes it easy to find and fix issues by aggregating data of different types of data from different places, upstream suppliers, downstream return centers, of course, your main manufacturing hubs and final assembly plants, and creating a single digital thread where the data is organized by serial number, traceable to the most basic level so you can understand everything that's happened to every unit. And so we connect that thread directly to your people. So for the most important part of what we're doing is really getting this data in real time to the engineers. On the next slide here, you can see operations people. They might want to see real-time monitoring on their lines of test data and yield results and dashboards, and get alerts whenever something goes wrong. Then on the engineering side, they might be leveraging image data to look for visual issues that they're not quite sure how to handle, with monitor setup looking for giving you Pareto's trend charts of the biggest issues, and help prioritize where the engineering team can spend their time to solve as many problems as possible. There's also a suite of AI tools in there to help accelerate failure analysis when issues do come up, both looking at image data and in functional test data, as well as connecting the two, which is one of our customers' favorite capabilities. And then finally, leaders are getting a lot of value out of this by consuming reports that enable them to assess where the top risks are and prioritize their team across multiple different programs, particularly when you're dealing with multiple factories producing the same parts in different countries. This is where leaders have gotten a lot of bang for buck by being able to keep an eye on all of those different sites and compare them together. So with that in mind, Jack, can you give us a few real life stories of how our customers have put this to use?
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So, we know that collecting data, as the rule today, enables you to capture the core know-how behind building, your products, and also starts the clock on building, intergenerational product rules without relying on tribal knowledge. So even if not all of your data points have an obvious usage today, storing them in a clean, accessible format that anyone can access creates opportunities, as new technologies are developed that can, mine that information for more insights in the future. So in a recent case study, Axon, one of our customers, talks about how they were able to leverage their investment in data infrastructure to rapidly onboard new team members located halfway around the world in this challenging environment, while simultaneously bringing up 2 new factories, all without being in the same room. So they're already mining their database for deeper understanding about issues and root causes that will carry forward into future programs. So definitely recommend taking a look at that full case study, because we've just been seeing this pattern over and over again. Teams needing to diversify their factory locations and wanting to ensure consistency across all those locations.
I remember working with with Axon on this. And at the beginning of their program, they were really worried about this new factory in a completely new city they were bringing up, and their team was not able, their usual team was not able to travel to the factory. They were going to go through the whole program having never once stepped foot in that factory. And by the end of the program, they had forgotten that it was a new factory because they were able to get insight into what was happening. They were working with the teams on concrete issues with Instrumental as the backbone of kind of that source of truth that, you know, they were kind of laughing at the end, like, oh my God, I totally forgot that this was a new factory. And boy, isn't that the dream, to have any new factory you bring up be so easy that you don't even remember it's new.
Well, it's a new world, a new digital world we're living in. So yeah, I mean, hopefully these sort of stories get easier and easier and easier as technology improves. But yeah, let's take a look at another case study that was a little bit different in terms of how we're accelerating your engineering team. So in this example, you know, Instrumental typically doesn't look at semiconductors, but this Fortune 50 company came to us with images from their existing Keyence systems, wanting to understand if Instrumental could help them make sense of defects in their MEMS transducers. In addition to images, they also had functional test data for these same dies. What we're able to do is connect all this data together from them, and in a matter of hours, the customer was able to see some dramatic results. They were able to use our Discover Relationships feature to correlate functional test failures to actual visual defects that they previously thought were just cosmetic. So they had the data that they needed to know that these cosmetic defects actually matter to performance and that limits would be necessary. So they're able to take corrective action based on the findings of these correlations. They were able to identify actually 39 defect types and rapidly get a distribution of failure modes so that they could understand their process maturity, which they were previously unable to do. In this instance, the lead on the program was so excited about the work, he shared that previously that they would have to rely on a series of serendipitous events that to have stumbled upon these correlations. And it may have taken them up to 5 months really to track down the causes of these failures. But with Instrumental, they were able to do it in just a few hours. And based on the strength of these results, the customer felt that it was an absolute no-brainer to expand the usage of Instrumental for future die lots.
And this is such an awesome story. You know, earlier I talked about the reason for founding Instrumental was, you know, that reaction. There's got to be a better way than this kind of brute force method where, you know, I remember my trips to Asia and going to all these factories. You really were just relying on luck and hoping that you would be in the right place at the right time to see the right defect and be able to solve that problem. And this is just so cool to see, you know, anytime you make a change in manufacturing, there's going to be a lot of risk, and you want to be able to de-risk things as quickly as possible and get them back to stable. And that these guys, these engineers, had the tools they needed to actually take all that luck out of it and actually go through the data, that complete data record, and actually solve their problems instead of waiting months and hoping nothing bad happened.
Yeah, we've come a long ways from pen and paper and clipboards.
Amen to that. All right, and we got one more story here. Love seeing my face on the slide here. So this is a story from P2i, where we were introduced to them from a mutual customer that was finding escapes from P2i's factory as they deliver their parts to the final assembly site. P2i was a supplier in this process. And so their job was to apply this really, really cool dunkable coating. It's sort of this gel-like material that waterproofs PCBs so that when they go into a final smartphone that they can survive harsher, wetter conditions. And they'd previously tried to use computer vision, various types of measurement, 2D, even 3D measurement machines to provide pass-fail determination without getting the results they wanted, where they were just not able to draw those hard lines of specs for keep in and keep out zones for this amorphous gel material that was also slightly transparent, and be able to make sure that nothing was escaping the line. Either anything they said was too tight and just failing things inconsistently, too many false positives, or it was too loose and then something would escape out of line. And it was really hard to anticipate all the different ways things could fail. So when they started working with us, they were able to rapidly adopt Instrumental, get it up and running in their process quickly, and used our Discover AI capability to identify new failure modes. They had over 100 tests running, looking for different failure modes at each location on their line, and were able to validate 100% of parts because they had that full data record and traceability. So once they started using Instrumental and then eliminating those downstream escapes to their supplier, they were excited about both reducing their inspection costs by half, as well as their rework, but also about how they were able to cut down on the overhead of working through this process so efficiently. They didn't need to travel out to the factory nearly as much, and they were able to solve problems a lot faster with the factory. So they described it as like tripling their engineering team, which was a huge win for a small team trying to work with one of their major customers.
Yeah. Yeah, in a world where everything is just so resource constrained, you know, and in this period of the Great Resignation that we're seeing here, it just, you know, this is just so crucial for being successful. You know, it's hard to really say how far tripling your engineering team really goes.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, that wraps up our stories here. Watch your email. We'll send out some more tips after this on building resiliency into your supply chain. But we also wanted to open up the floor to some questions. Pulling up the chat here, just put any questions you have in the chat. See a few questions already. How long does it take to get data from your line with Instrumental? Jack, you want to take a swing at that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so Instrumental works with a few different types of data. Of course, there's parametric test data, which is, you know, as long as it's serialized, anything that can really fit into an Excel spreadsheet, we can ingest into our system. There's image data, and then there's also recently we added the ability to actually ingest video data for key assembly steps. So I would say that like it can depend on where your factory's data maturity is at, but with the test data, it's a fairly simple process. We have a REST API that usually takes less than a day for someone to integrate with on either the brand or the CM side. So we have sample scripts and other methodologies that get the test data up and running into the system within less than a day. So once we have that data, so it can be fairly quick. But we also, for the image data, if you have your own cameras or if you're using a Keyence like we saw in the customer example, or just any other camera, we have an API for that. Sort of similar time frame as the parametric test data. Can be done less than a day, but usually not more than a week. And then with our physical stations, we actually offer something called Instrumental Emergency Services, where if you need a really rapid turnaround, if you're facing a really tight problem that needs fast action, that can be shipped out to your factory and set up within less than a week. So we do want to make sure that we are moving very quickly and agile to meet the needs of our customers. Will, anything that you want to add there?
No, that was pretty great. I would say the theme is it's fast. It's a lot faster than people expect. We had one customer say, if I knew how easy this would have been, I would have bought a lot more. But when it comes to the last details, when it comes to actually putting things in factories, it depends where in the world the factory is, but it's typically on the order of 4 to 6 weeks. The key part of that, though, is we have a team of integration engineers, both on the hardware and software side, that work directly with the factory and get things set up for you. So there's very light load on teams, even during that 4-week period. We've done this, dozens of times, and so we know how to do this really quickly and efficiently, rather than putting all that work on our customers who might be doing something for the first time.
Mm-hmm. And we've worked with all of the largest CMs, so we've seen pretty much everything out there.
All right, we have another question here. Can you list a few product types that you work on, and how long does it take the AI to work on those? big range of products. Let's see, some highlights. I would say there's little tiny circuit boards that might go into wearables, up to carbon fiber wheels. And recently we've been doing a lot of work with large electronics in the industrial sector. You know, Jack mentioned some of the stimulus and then government spending, as well as renewable energy needs of the world. Those larger electronics, you know, things bigger than a toaster, have been really challenging because they're so large. So I would say that's been one area where I've seen the most growth recently. Any other types of products you would highlight, Jack?
Yeah. No, I mean, I personally love working with sort of those green technologies like electric car chargers, solar inverters. Those are really exciting. But yeah, I mean, all the way down to earbuds and phones. It's really across the board.
How long does it take the AI to work? That's the great thing about our platform, is it's product agnostic. It's designed to work with your data, learn from your data. It's not comparing your data to anyone else's. So as long as we can get about 30 images, AI can start processing 30 images and start giving you insights. And from the data standpoint, any amount of data works as well. So for traceability, it works right away. And for AI, it's usually a day or two of production is enough to get everything you need. Actually, what's fun about that is a lot of our customers will use Instrumental in NPI. So we spent a lot of time talking about mass production today, but the number one thing those mass production teams want from their engineering teams is solving problems faster. And so that's where we work with a lot of NPI teams to try and root out all those problems, find those root causes, get fixes in place, and bring a far more mature product to mass production. So that's only possible because our AI can work on really small batches, as I said, down to about 30 units worth of data. If you have more traditional types of AI tools that need thousands or tens of thousands of labeled units in data sets to find things, it's just not going to work in NPI. So you're going to have to wait until all those problems are already baked in and then try and screen them out in mass production rather than just solving them when you can still make changes easily. It's a great question. All right. We'll hang around here for another minute or two waiting for questions. One reminder though, while we wrap up here, is to sign up for our next event, which is a teardown of the Sonos room. There's a link in the chat and you can fill out a survey at the end with some feedback there. But we'd love to see you all there. We actually may have a special guest with that teardown, someone who's actually worked on the product to come work with us and tell us about some of the design choices in that product and how they got that to mass production as well. Thank you, Joel. That's September 29th. So that's next week at 10 a.m. Pacific. If you miss it though, all of our teardowns can also be found at the Change Notice site on Instrumental's website. So you can just Google Instrumental Change Notice and find any of our previous about, I think, 15 or so teardowns of various products across the industry. Yep. All right, then with that, let's wrap it up today. Thank you everyone for joining. Jack, any parting words?
No, yeah, thanks everyone for joining. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about our product, I'm always doing more research interviews to understand your pains priorities. So feel free to reach out and let's stay in touch.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for coming today. And we hope to see you next week at our Sonos Teardown. Have a good day, everyone.